Let us sit comfortably in our chairs or on the floor, spine straight, feet firmly planted on the floor, and our hands held as Vivekananda is holding his right upturned palm, resting in a left upturned palm. Closing our eyes and taking in 3 deep breaths, breathing in deeply and exhaling completely. Picture the mind as a calm lake stretched before you. Let the mind drift. See how thoughts come and go as bubbles, rising and breaking on the surface, becoming ripples that are ever widening circles. Make no effort to control your thoughts, but watch them. Follow them in imagination as they rise, break, and float away. I am not the mind. I see that I am thinking. I am watching my mind act. Hold fast to the idea, I am the witness, watching my mind drift. The mind is not I. Watch the mind as a thing entirely apart from yourself. Identify yourself with God, never with the mind or matter. Be the witness. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace. We will be referring to this guided meditation in our talk as we investigated the prescriptions for spiritual wellness, which is the first chapter of the Yoga Sutras all this month. For those of you who were not here last week, a quick review. Yoga, the word yoga means concentration, to become one with the object of our thought, or our true nature, in the case of those who are meditating on their true self. But we can perform concentration on an object of the world or of God. Its procedure is to raise our thinking and become one with the object of our thought. The yoga system was not created by Patanjali. It's a revealed truth, and it uses an investigative approach put into a rational, sequential manner. And it became a system for us to reach the goal. There's not much psychology or philosophy discussed in the Yoga Sutras, Sutra means thread. These sutras are just a thread of thought, and it's the commentators who came later who gave wonderful commentaries and explanations on each of these sutras. And we will be tapping into those commentaries. It's not intended to change our beliefs. You can be a Christian, a Jew, a Muslim, and still practice the Yoga Sutras. They expose us to our Ishvara, the personal God. And we receive from them various options for personal self-development. Let's begin. With the Sutra 1 through 12. Sutras 1 through 4 give us the cream of the Yoga Sutras. In it, Patanjali summarizes the yoga system. First of all, when there's a cessation of thought waves in the mind, and those of you who have done a little bit of meditation know that the mind is just a whirlpool of thoughts, images, emotions. If there is a cessation of thought waves in the mind, one's true nature is revealed, just like the bottom of the lake that you were meditating upon. When they're not stilled, our true nature is obstructed. So how does that help us? In Sutras 1 through 4, Patanjali defines the goal for us and the obstructions to the goal. Very simple. And the next verses reveal point by point the nature of the obstruction, the thought waves themselves. Sutra 5, Patanjali tells us that there are two types of thought waves, painful and non-painful. And we've all experienced this in our lives. Sutra 6 delineates the 5 kinds of mental activity. In other words, the thought waves, the vrittis. They are knowledge, misapprehension, verbal delusion, sleep, and memory. And then Patanjali analyzes each of them. In Sutra 7, what brings clear cognition? Direct perception, inference, proof of right knowledge. In this case, that knowledge would come from the scriptures or the great seers we have known and associated with. And all of these processes of refining our mind, we've done that in school and in higher education. So those of you who are attending this, you are already, close to embarking on the path. Sutra 8 describes indiscrimination, allows us to misread an event or an object. For example, and this example is given because in India, there are many snakes. And so when you are walking, it's often possible to mistake a rope for a snake. But once when I was in Coimbatore walking in the evening with the head of the center, we came upon an object that looked like a snake. And so the Swami investigated, and it was in fact a poisonous snake. So this is a very good example of how we can be deluded. Sutra 9 talks about verbal delusion. For example, if we accept any news at face value without questioning. Again, we've learned this in school. Sutra 10, Patanjali tells us that sleep embraces voidness. It's not samadhi. Though in deep sleep, the ego is not projected, but the true self is veiled. And we discussed in our last talk how sleep for the rishis is different than our sleep. In Sutra 11, we understand that memory allows us to re-experience past events. To summarize then, we have understood the types of the thought waves that obstruct our true nature and disturb our mind, and what mental faculties we can develop to still those negative thought waves. And in verse 12, we learn in the meantime that thought waves are brought under control by practice and non-attachment. So the breakdown of how to control the movements of the mind then leads us to Sutra 12. Patanjali says, in the meantime, thought waves are controlled by practice and non-attachment. That practice means spiritual practice, which your guru has given you. The mantra, the meditation, how often you are to practice that with regularity. In Sutra 13, Patanjali tells us, Tatra stitau yatno bhyasaha. Continuous struggle to keep vrittis restrained is called abhyasa. So this mind of ours is in constant motion. Even in deep sleep, there's some level of activity. And when we're awake, the mind's normal state is distracted. There's a constant internal chatter going on all the time, even now. So to stop the movement of the mind, the movement of any object, what do? We try to hold it steady. The same principle applies to the activity of the mind. To check the fluctuations of the mind, stimulated by externals, we try to make the mind one-pointed. Swami Brahmananda, disciple of Sri Ramakrishna, said at one time, even after a year of steady practice, you will find some result. In the first flush of our endeavor with Vedanta practice, there's a lot of enthusiasm. That's apt to wane after some time, but the effort must be kept constant. And why, after 1 year, do we find some result? Because we have faith. David Adhikali, one of our commentators, states, if the mind can be held in steadiness and one thought alone, it will no longer jump about. There still will be activity of a sort, but it will be singularly focused and subdued. So the concept of our true nature increases the more we go deeper within our being. It grows along with our continuous practice. The more effort we make, the more we leave old thought habits that get in the way behind. So what is renunciation? That sounds like a very scary word. Our teachers tell us, let the vrittis of the mind remain. That's the thought waves, the emotions, the memories. There's nothing wrong in having thoughts. Thoughts can't be destroyed. It's our reaction to the thought, our indulgence and interest in the thought, and the imitation of that thought that disturbs us. So is there a positive, gradual way to develop renunciation? We learn in Sutra 14. Tatu dirga kala nairantarya satkara sevito dhrita bhumihi. It becomes firmly grounded by long, constant efforts with great love and devotion. We can't expect a quick fix. For many years, for many lifetimes, we've not disciplined our mind. Yoga must be practiced regularly and consistently over a long term. We must respect our practice. How do we do that? By recognizing the value of what we're doing, then taking it seriously by steady commitment. For example, Sri Ramakrishna, who was an exemplary renunciate of lust and greed, was described by Pratap Chandra Mazumdar. He said, for a long time he practiced a singular discipline. He took in one hand a piece of gold and in the other a lump of earth. He would then look at both, repeatedly calling the gold earth and the earth gold, and then shuffling the contents of one hand into the other. He would keep up the process until he lost all sense of the difference between the gold and the earth. It's a wonderful example to remember that we can visualize better when we're actually handling the visual construct. This demonstrates a lofty example of commitment and steadfastness until the goal was reached. So these practices are for us to observe and to try to incorporate in some way into our life. So with the repetition of the mantra, how to bring love and devotion into our practice. This mantra meditation can become mechanical, but not thoughtless. We can take the mantra with us wherever we go. Constant practice is possible. Conviction comes with initiation. At that time, we feel the support of a sacred lineage. And while repeating the mantra, we keep the mind alert and remind ourselves of our chosen ideal that the mantra is symbolizing. Until finally this mantra japa becomes automatic with us. And there are many experiences that come from the mantra alone. With repeated effort, there's a cumulative effect. The practice adds up. The more practice, the easier it becomes. And with the results, we become firmly grounded. Sutra 15, Patanjali tells us, Drishta anushravaka vishaya vitrishnaya vashikara samgya vairagyam. That effect which comes to those who have given up their thirst after objects, either seen or heard, and which wills to control the objects, is non-attachment. Okay, so let's unpack this. Every experience is stored in the mind as a mental impression. Everything, including you being here. So mental impressions rise to the surface with every new experience we have, and they determine how we act and react. In other words, what happened 10 years ago was something that made a deep impression on the mind. When that same kind of experience comes to us, we react in a similar way, unless we learn from yoga how to attenuate negative impressions and firmly establish positive ones. That's how we change. Mental conditioning causes attraction and repulsion to things internal, thoughts, memories, and external, objects of desire or repulsion. For example, if we're addicted to chocolate, even the word chocolate can cause the mouth to water. So dispassion is freedom from reaction and the lessening of mental activity. That's the key. And then we begin to control our thoughts and feelings. And with that, we begin to develop serenity. Sutra 16. Tat param purusha kyatir guna vaitrishnam. Extreme non-attachment gives up even the thirst for the gunas, which comes from the knowledge of the Purusha. And here we have Sri Ramakrishna in a very high state. So dispassion gives us a new frame of reference for looking at life. We're no longer under the sway of the gunas. Now, what are the gunas? Tamas means darkness or inactivity. Rajas, attraction or repulsion. And sattva, the equilibrium of the two. The factors and forces of nature, which includes the mind. So within this mind of us, we may have a sattvic moment, especially when we come out of meditation, or we may be what is called an angry person, and that's rajas. Or we may be what is called a lazy person, tamas. Or we may have a combination of all three, and that's what usually happens within all of us. So, as we become grounded, we enjoy life in a new way. We begin to get a feeling of what this mind is. We begin to be able to observe it. And in that way, we become the parent of the mind. We become the adult mind, the higher mind that was watching the lake of the mind at the beginning of this talk. We can become dispassionate toward reputation or honor. There's a beautiful example of this when Swami Suhita Nanda, the former general secretary of the order, who is now the vice president of the order, and who visited the center right after its inauguration. When he came, his attendant told us a story of a very revered Swami traveling to Western countries in Western clothes. And especially in the days when I first joined the convent, our Indian Swamis were very, very careful about traveling in civilian clothes because the Gerawa robes were looked upon as rather peculiar by Westerners. When this Swami returned to India, he was greeted by the sadhus at Bellarmont who took the dust of his feet. But some onlookers snickered. They were not used to the Bellarmont Swamis. And one said to the other, "See how the Bellarmont Swamis are attached to such big donors as this man must be. They even take the dust of his feet." And here he was, a very senior, revered Swami. And when Swami Suhitananda heard this story, he laughed. What great humor. So we also become dispassionate towards any disturbance. And a wonderful example of this we find in Sri Ramakrishna's life. Kridoy, who was his nephew, was ordered to leave Dakshineshwar for a misdeed he had committed. And the temple guards had mistakenly asked Sri Ramakrishna to also leave. So without a word of protest, Sri Ramakrishna put his towel over his shoulder and left his room and walked towards the gate. Trailokya, the son of Mathur Babu, the proprietor of Dakshineshwar, saw him and shouted, "Sir, what are you doing? Where are you going?" And Sri Ramakrishna replied, you told your guard to order me to leave the temple compound." Trailokya was so embarrassed. He said, "No, sir, I didn't. Please come back. The guard made a terrible mistake." So smiling, Sri Ramakrishna returned to his room. That is dispassion. When the mind is steadied, it develops a larger sense of being. And this sutra is very important. Vitarka, vichara, ananda, asmita, anugamat sampragyataha. The samadhi endowed with right knowledge is that which is attended by reasoning, discrimination, bliss, and unqualified ego. Now, these are stages of concentration, meditation, and approaching samadhi. And we're going to unpack all of these so that we understand how they apply to us and how they can apply to us. The word sampragyata can be understood in two ways. The first interpretation is sampragyata means cognitive. And the word actually can't be translated in this way, but it means insight unfolds one step at a time in a logical, systematic way. What you were 10 years ago is not the same mind you have today. That gives you some example of the progression that takes place in the human mind, much faster in a spiritual aspirant's mind. In ordinary awareness, attention shifts from one thing to another. Real attention is rare. For example, a yogic process of deepening our range of our cognition is through abhyasa, steadiness and constant practice. Vitarka, the word vitarka, means to direct the mind to a particular object and try to focus there. This is what we do when we're meditating, or this is what we do in our life when we're concentrating at our job, at home, in whatever we do. The mind is meditating upon an object again and again, as in meditation, by isolating it from other objects. For example, let's say if we try to meditate on the sky, we focus on the sky and try to hold our attention on the thought of the sky. This is all an internal process. But then other thoughts arise, such as clouds. Clouds are not the sky. So these associations give rise to other associations, and soon we've forgotten the sky altogether. But when we are finally able to still the mind of other thoughts, and which takes practice, the thoughts of the sky become continuous, more focused, and there's a continuing attentiveness, which brings forth a deeper, more lucid understanding of the sky. Now, what does that mean? This deeper insight brings joy. That joy was always there within us, but our distracting thoughts had covered it up. This is what is called the joy of concentration. And that comes when there's at least 12 seconds of unbroken concentration. Now, this is hard to do. That means unbroken concentration with no background thoughts. But it's the first stage in meditation. So this vitarka is like holding the pot. And that's a reference to Buddhist scripture. Now remember, Buddha took the words of the Vedanta, Yoga Vedanta tradition. He was a Hindu. It wasn't until 200 years later that Buddhism as a religion was established. So many of the terms in Buddhism come from the Sanskrit. Vichara is like scrubbing the pot to remove all the dirt. And again, that refers to a Buddhist scripture. Ananda is like beholding the shining pot, the shine of the pot. And asmita, I amness, refers to something we will discuss later. Most of the time, we're in the state of vitarka. We're still aware of our own existence and that we're trying to meditate on an object. So we have a knower, we have an object of meditation, and we're in the process of knowing. Vichara means continued exercise of the mind on that object alone, along with a dawning awareness of its properties and nature. So says one of our commentators, Devadatta Kali. And what happens when that occurs, that gives rise to joy. Ananda. And then asmita, this I amness, is the bliss found in the causal sheath, the Anandamaya kosha. Now, Vedanta lets us understand that we, as a psychophysical being, have 5 sheaths. This physical sheath is the Annamaya kosha. Our breath is the Pranamaya kosha, the life breath. And the mind is the Manomaya kosha. And the intelligence, the higher mind, the part of your mind that was watching your mind in the opening meditation, is the Vijnanamaya kosha. That is the part of the mind that we must develop. That is the part of the mind that leads us to absorption in the Atman. And the blissful sheath, that absorption, is Anandamaya kosha. The second interpretation of sampragyata means samadhi. According to Vyasa, a commentator of the Sankhya school, and later commentators, there are 6 degrees of lower samadhi. In ascending order, they are, in the vitarka topic, savitarka and nirvitarka. Let's begin with savitarka. What happens in that state? There's concentration on a gross object. It can be anything, but say it's a patch of skin on the back of your hand. It can be a dot. It can be a sound. So what is the process? The mind moves from being spread out, as it is normally, to being collected and pinpointed. And the mind is forced to move in one direction, not seeing or hearing simultaneously as we're doing now. So interest draws the mind totally toward the object. And the same vritti, the same thought, is continuously generated in our mind. So this chitta, this lake of the mind that we were watching in the beginning of this talk, takes the shape of only the form of that object. Only the form. Several moments, seconds, minutes pass, and we're able to increase our capacity to hold onto the object of concentration of our liking. Our attraction and affection for it stimulates our involvement for it. So this capacity of the human mind is available to all. What is the result? Though the mind becomes absorbed, time and space remain to some extent, and the object remains. For example, Swami Vivekananda was annoyed by the jute mill whistle, and so Sri Ramakrishna asked him to meditate instead on the sound of the whistle, and he achieved much benefit from that. Now we come to nirvitarka samadhi, the next rung on the ladder of vitarka. When the savitarka state of meditation deepens and matures, what is the process? We have the capacity then to lose ourselves in the object of concentration. It can be the beauties of nature, as Ansel Adams, a famous photographer, and the nature mystic John Muir experienced. Yes, they experienced that. When that capacity is cultured and discipline is followed, then we can hold the mind on the object for a prolonged period of time. This can be with eyes open or with eyes closed. It's easier to concentrate if we choose an object that attracts us. And we can take advantage of our attraction to the arts and the sciences. Yes, some of the artists, scientists, composers, even conductors have had that capacity. Wilhelm Furtwängler was a great creative musical genius. He's a prime example. Although he was not an adherent to Nazism, he was a leading composer and conductor who chose to remain in Germany during the Hitler regime because he was named the principal conductor of the Berlin Philharmonic, the world's finest philharmonic orchestra at that time. A first violinist shared this story about his greatness, that all the musicians in his orchestra felt music had a living quality of its own. At one musical program, the orchestra started playing the opening overture to a piece without its conductor present, when suddenly the quality of music changed altogether and uplifted them all. The first violinist and others turned and saw Furtwängler enter and realized that the music was coming from within him. Why is it important to concentrate in meditation for a prolonged period of time? And that period is usually given in instruction by the guru. If you're not used to meditating, it can begin with 10 minutes, twice a day, usually at dawn or sunset. Then you can expand it to 15, 20, a half an hour. And then the guru decides if you can go on for an hour, but gradually to prolong the time, depending on your capacity. Why do we prolong it? Because with such practice, we won't attain any great depth and involvement with the object of our meditation. Unless we're committed to concentrate wholeheartedly, the object won't unfold its mystery, which it holds in itself. So when our meditation deepens, a sense of time and space become diminished, and we see the object as it is. In Furtwängler's case, it was the sound, the musical sound. In the case of meditators, it is the mental image of the chosen ideal. So penetrative attention becomes so one-pointed, it pierces through the covering of ignorance of the object. The object gives up its mystery. And the object, say it can be a dot, the object alone shines. And there's no longer a sense of you and the dot. Only the object is. The result? Time and space disappear on the object. Only the object remains on its own. Now we come to vichara. And again, we have two stages in vichara, savichara and nirvichara. Savichara means to be absorbed in the domain of abstract ideas. Concentration on a mental abstraction, such as the mental image, let's say, of Sri Ramakrishna's form in the heart, or a sound, such as the mental japa we're performing, the mantra. So the process is the five sense organs are no more involved. We're concentrating on ideas. We're in the idea realm. We take the sense of seeing or hearing, and we concentrate on that until we hear the humming sound of the mantra in the inner ear. That's meditation on the sound of the mantra. Or we experience Sri Ramakrishna in the heart until he seems intensely present and living. His whole body appears vividly. Sri Ramakrishna, Holy Mother, Christ, Buddha, whatever one's chosen ideal is. What are the results? We lose a sense of time and space to some extent. We're vaguely aware of the ego. We're aware of the object in time and space. For example, J.C. Bose, the international scientist in Kolkata, determined plants have life and respond to stimulations. This story was shared by Lady Bose and handed down to Swami Sridharananda, who later shared it with me in Dallas here in 2008. When J.C. Bose was immersed in his research, he went through the process of vitarka. He was submerged in his scientific experiments to find out the secret of consciousness in plants. Now again, sampragyata means that object unfolds the mystery that surrounds it and gives itself away. So every day after breakfast, he would go to his institute, which is in Almora. His house was just below the institute. And Lady Bose would go to the institute, and say it's time for lunch. Sir Bose was reluctant to leave his lab one day. And he told her, "You have your lunch. I am right in the thick of my experiment. Leave my food in the anteroom for me to take at my leisure." So 3 days and 3 nights passed, and the food remained untouched. Sir Bose became so involved in solving the mystery whether plants have life, he lost all track of time and his body requirements. On the 4th day, his face was beaming with joy. He came down from the institute and told his wife, "Not only have I discovered that plants have consciousness, I have discovered the reality behind that consciousness." Now, is this real? Boshi Sen, who was J.C. Bose's protege, later related to my teacher, Swami Pravrajika, that once Swami Brahmananda expressed a desire to see some of Bose's famous experiments showing the sensitivity of plants to external stimuli. When he visited the institute, he watched the experiments we demonstrated with him with great interest, Bose said. That evening, he was still preoccupied with what he had seen in the laboratory. There was a time, Maharaj told me, when Sri Ramakrishna could not step on the grass, but would jump from one bare spot to another to avoid hurting the grass. At that time, we simply didn't believe that grass could be sensitive. From what I saw today, I realized how infallibly true his perceptions were. A little later, he added to Boshi Sen, "Don't give up your science. You will get everything through this." What a boon. Now we come to nirvichara. It's a stage when awareness, time, space, the small self, are almost lost. In the same meditation, our concentration deepens and we lose a sense of time and space. And the aspirant sees fine elements as they are. In savichara, for example, we can experience Sri Ramakrishna in the heart until he seems intensely present and living. His whole body appears vividly. Now, this is a state of deep concentration. In nirvichara, one no longer feels, "I am seeing Sri Ramakrishna." The aspirant sees only the form of Sri Ramakrishna, and that alone shines. The I almost disappears. So this is a very scientific analysis done by the yogis of ancient India. Now we come to the stage of ananda, bliss. Gross and subtle elements are given up. Those elements we can see and finer elements as well. And the object of meditation is the interior organ, the buddhi itself, this higher mind of yours that was watching your lower mind. It becomes the object of meditation, bereft of all thought, activity, and dullness. So you can imagine how far along you must be in spiritual life to be able to practice this kind of meditation. This part of the mind that is in the heart is where spiritual experience takes place. And that may be a little difficult at first to mentally imagine. But in fact, that higher mind is not up here. It's here. It's within the sacred heart, the cave of the heart, the Hridaya Akasha, which is 5 finger spans up from the navel towards the spine. A locus that cannot be identified or with any scientific equipment. So this faculty of experiencing that bliss becomes the object of meditation. In other words, the aspirant has gone beyond meditation on a gross object and then mental abstraction as well, and now concentrates on the mechanics of mental movement. Subtler than the domain of ideas means more excess of sattva is manifest in this concentration. A greater enjoyment of bliss is experienced in this stage. Now, this is all words to us because we haven't attained anywhere near that state. But see the scientific levels of concentration, meditation, and samadhi that have been developed. The results are euphoric ecstasy and joy. One loses body consciousness altogether. This is called videha samadhi. But the aspirant is not yet beyond the orbit of prakriti and can have a fall. There is generated within this samadhi a tremendous capacity to concentrate on anything. But if not disciplined, this enormous outflow of energy can go downward. This ananda samadhi, or sananda as it's often called, has a capacity to stop further growth. So it needs tremendous willpower, such ecstasy that the aspirant can deceive himself or herself that they have reached the goal, often takes place. Then we come, if you can go beyond that, we come to asmita, the unqualified awareness of my amness. The meditator has grown beyond Ananda Samadhi, from concentrating on the mechanics of experiencing sananda to the root cause of the experiencer, the asmita, the I amness, the amness. So what has transpired? A meditation on the buddhi itself has deepened to the point where in the sattva state of ego remains. The knower is bereft of all body consciousness. There's a sense of having a fine body. This is savikalpa samadhi. This is a higher stage than savichara and nirvichara. The I am of Vedanta comes from the Atman, the Purusha, but ultimately disappears in the Atman. It's an intuition of the Atman, this I amness. As Ramana Maharshi said at one time, hold on to I am. That will take you to the Atman. But in the self, there is no I am. So this atmata, asmita, is reflected consciousness of the Atman in the buddhi. It's reflected consciousness, but doesn't yet know it's infinite because of the buddhi, which is individual. Again, that buddhi was your higher mind, watching the lower mind and it points to the unseen seer, the Atman. So there's a knot between consciousness and the buddhi. The root of the individual is tied to this knot between consciousness and buddhi. So the ecstasy and joy of Ananda Samadhi is gone and replaced by tranquility. The whole cosmos ceases to exist for you. And it's an indescribable peace. As Christ said, the peace that passeth all understanding. We're aware of Prakriti and Purusha, of Vyakta Bhumi, merged in the unmanifest Prakriti, the universe. Powers come. Powers of the mind come. Whatever you wish or say at that time will happen. One a revered Swami who was in our Santa Barbara convent saw a young nun climbing up into one of our navel orange trees. And he said, "Get down, Mangala, or you will fall." And he covered his mouth and said, "You must never climb that tree again." So one can also look back on many lifetimes. Awareness has broken all limits of space and time. We become aware of previous lives because we're one with the eternal Prakriti, and we have Pravrajika. We know enough is enough. We have no desire to reincarnate. We know the root of this universe. For example, Swami Brahmananda had this power that we read in the Eternal Companion, his biography by Swami Pravrajika. As a young monk, he was known as Abani, and he sat one day cross-legged in front of Maharaj, Swami Brahmananda, with Maharaj's feet resting on his knees. Something inexplicable happened to him, though he felt it was Maharaj's doing. In Swami Prabhavananda's own words, "I found myself in a condition in which I was talking and talking, forgetting my usual restraint. It seemed to me that I spoke freely and even eloquently for a long time, but I do not remember what I said. Maharaj just listened and said nothing. Suddenly, I returned to normal consciousness," Swami Prabhavananda related, "and became aware of Maharaj leaning toward me and asking with an amused smile, 'What did you say?' I then realized that I had addressed him as Tumi, the familiar form of you, which is used in speaking to only equals and friends. At this, he seemed to lose all interest in the conversation and sat upright again." Swami Prabhavananda went on, "I can only assume that Maharaj wanted to corroborate his own intuitive knowledge of my past lives, and that he therefore put me into this unusual state of consciousness in which I was able to tell him what he wanted to know." Sri Ramakrishna did the same thing to Narayan with a touch, and Narayan lost consciousness. Sri Ramakrishna later told his monastic disciples, "I asked him many questions, such as who he really was, where he had come from, why he had been born, how long he would stay in the world, and so on." In the Bhagavad Gita, 4th chapter, verse 5, Sri Krishna said, "You and I, Arjuna, have lived many lives. I remember them all. You do not remember." Sutra 18. Brahmapratya ayabhyasa purva samskaresho nyaha. There is another samadhi which is attained by the constant practice of the cessation of all mental activity, in which the chitta retains only the manifested impressions. So this Sampragyata, the experience which generates itself from complete, unambiguous knowing, that knowledge matures into an experience which removes secrecy that surrounds the object, from the grossest to the subtlest in Prakriti. So the difference between sampragyata and asampragyata samadhi is this. The first difference is that in sampragyata, the object of concentration is a gross object of the world. In asampragyata samadhi, it destroys the last bond with the world, ahamasmi, by our mind. And this is a state that we see of Sri Ramakrishna in Nirvikalpa Samadhi. At the time of Patanjali, gold was purified from ore. And when gold is purified, the acid which is poured on the alloy and over the dirt neutralizes itself, and what remains? Pure gold. The acid is something different, but in alchemy, it burns out all dirt, and in the process, it becomes neutralized. So also, our intention and willpower to free ourselves will burn itself off, and we are what we are, remains. The second difference is that in Sampragyata Samadhi, Sri Ramakrishna described the experience in the Agya Chakra, third eye chakra, as like a glass separating the Purusha from the light, as we have in this slide. In Asampragyata Samadhi, there is no glass separating. So we see in Sri Ramakrishna's life, he experimented with apparently conflicting points of view. Totapuri came from the puja, searching for a sadhu with features showing he was ready to be initiated into Nirvikalpa Samadhi. Sri Ramakrishna was waiting for him. Totapuri said, "You seem to be highly qualified. Are you interested in Nirvikalpa Samadhi?" Sri Ramakrishna said, "My mother knows." He then went to the Kali temple to ask Mother Kali and returned, "Yes, my mother agrees." 3 days' time, his mind was destroyed. The master was given directions to stop the formation of the vrittis of his mind, but always saw the luminous form of Kali and got stuck there. And 3 times he said to Totapuri, his guru, "I can't go beyond my mother." Totapuri then took glass and pierced the skin between his eyebrows and told Sri Ramakrishna to meditate on that sensation. Why? The sensation was so piercing, Sri Ramakrishna could not take his mind away, nor allow it to be taken away from that chakra, the doorway to the absolute. So when Sri Ramakrishna saw the form of Mother Kali, the pratyaya of the Divine Mother, he continued to concentrate on the piercing sensation instead, and thus merged into Nirvikalpa Samadhi. What happened? There was no mind to create a vritti. Virama pratyaya abhyasa purvaha, with continued effort to still all thoughts. That is the yoga technique. Manasa, mental power or spiritual mind, is the Vedanta technique. The last link between this world and Nirvikalpa Samadhi is asmita, I amness, removed with aham brahmasmi, which is the Vedanta technique. No one can express what happens to oneself because the mind is not there. The vritti that helps to translate the experience into words. Patanjali would tell us, I can't tell you the joy of that experience, but I can tell you how to reach that joy. Shankara would take an earthen pot and make holes in it, then put a lamp inside. And all holes, he said, show the effulgence within you. The attainment of spiritual oneness shows through the luminosity emitted by those holes. So the results, in conclusion, are we must know the reality behind the appearance, the unity behind the diversity. For example, when Sri Ramakrishna couldn't eat, his disciples requested him to ask the Divine Mother. And he responded, "Mother showed me I am eating through so many mouths," meaning the direct disciples. In this state, we lose identity and become one with the cosmos. We shed all limitations. Shedding all limitations means one day Sri Ramakrishna was eating and asked for salt. And Sarada Devi, who was cooking for him, said, "There is no spice in the salt rack." And Sri Ramakrishna became irritated. He said, "What do you mean there is no salt? Never say the word no. Always be positive." And finally, we experience our true nature. We are free from time, space, and causation. As the Mundaka Upanishad describes, the knot of the heart, which is ignorance, is loosed. All doubts are dissolved. All evil effects of deeds are destroyed when he who is both personal and impersonal is realized.
Hi. This is the second yoga asana practice for the Yoga Sutras lecture series that was done at the Vivekananda Center in April. And this particular practice is called strengthening our faith and devotion through our asana practice. So I'm just going to read a little bit. So if you didn't participate in the first session, it's not important. You can certainly join this one without having done that one. So in this practice, we want to ask ourselves as we hold each of the poses, how do I ensure stability and support in the pose? But at the same time, we want to ask ourselves, how do I let go of unnecessary support? In other words, where am I tensing and or gripping my muscles that don't provide any real true support? Common places you'll want to be aware of are your shoulders, your low back, neck, eyes, jaw, and even the abdominals. Although you will have your own favorites that may be up beyond those. You want to learn to be mindful of them and recognize that they're not really true supports. They're tension patterns, our body habits, body armor that give us a false sense of strength. And like all false supports, they lead to negative consequences and probable suffering. So there's a really important concept in yoga asana that we really need to understand. And this is the best time when we're working with stability. That is that relaxing and collapsing are not the same thing. We often confuse them. When I use the word collapsing, think of that maybe as just hanging out in your body, slumping. And we many times think we're relaxing. But in reality, we're just collapsing. And so when we do our yoga and we think of yoga as being a relaxing practice, many times we consciously, in our effort to relax in the poses, is we collapse in the poses. So we'll collapse in our major joints, in our shoulders by hunching, or in our hips by just sinking. This wears our joints out. So part of yoga is learning how to draw from our core for that stability. So we're going to try to be aware in our practice today of those two opposites. And we also want to just remember, I'll just remind you that ultimately posture practice in our yoga journey picks up less and less of our time as our body gets stronger, healthier, more able to sit for long periods of time without soreness or pain. Our practice naturally begins to drift more to the inward, what we call the inward practices of concentration, meditation, and ultimately samadhi. And our time, our formal time in our practice is given to, less and less time is given to our posture practice. Although it's probably always a part of our practice to maintain our strength. And so that strength allows us to actually have a deeper experience in our meditation. So, as always, in today's practice, as in all yoga practices, do your best, practice with vigor and enthusiasm, never push to the point of pain, and always, always remember to breathe. Okay, so let's begin. Sitting in mountain pose with our feet underneath our knees. Just move your toes around a little bit. Make that connection to the ground. So the ground is a true support. You can always count on it. And it gives us feedback. As we push down into it, it will push back up into us in an equal amount. So that can be very helpful. And then bring your shoulders over your hips. When we bring our shoulders over our hips and align our legs, we immediately begin to have to engage slightly through the core of the trunk in order to maintain that and to sit up really tall. Once we sit up tall, we want to draw our arm bones back and down. So the chest is expanded and the breath can be fuller. Now, it's more possible to relax the more superficial muscles of the body, like the muscles of the arms and the hands, and the muscles of the face and neck. So relax those without losing your posture. And just notice how that feels. To sit up tall, you're not rigid. But you're also not hanging out, collapsed. And just this simple pose can take a long time to develop because it does take core strength. So let's bring our hands together at our heart now. Join the fingers to the thumb. Close any space. Reach the elbows out to the side. And we'll take 3 ohms. So inhaling. Oh. 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 And then bow the head to the heart and salute the teacher within. And then releasing the hands, place them on your knees, and let's warm up the spine with cat-cow. So through the movements of the spine, keep your elbows straight throughout both of the inhale and the exhale. So as you inhale, you're arching your back, drawing the inhale all the way up. As you exhale, keep your elbows straight and push your spine back, tucking your chin. As soon as you need an inhale, begin to come forward. And exhale, going back. And then in your own breath rhythm, you don't have to follow me, just close your eyes and follow your own breath. And noticing how when you combine the breath and the movement together, it's just natural to slow the breath down a little bit so that you can coordinate it with your movement. Try to enjoy this very simple little pose. This is a pose that can really be helpful if you do it on a daily basis, just to keep the spine more mobile. Some of our aging issues come from having a really stiff spine, and therefore none of our limbs work very well. Our joints tighten up. And it's the last exhale, and we'll come back to mountain pose. And sitting in mountain pose, let's turn to the right and start to warm up the spine in a rotation. So draw your arm bones back. So all that you know about mountain pose applies wherever you're, or whatever pose you're doing. And then release. And we'll turn to the other side. And then coming back. So now we'll go through a couple of rounds of seated sun salutation to further warm the body. So let's inhale and take the arms overhead. Exhale and bow. Inhale, come halfway up, arch your back. Exhale and bow. Inhale, bring your right knee up, arch your back. Exhale, round your back. Inhale, take the arms up. And exhale, bow. Inhale, left knee up, arch your back. Exhale, round your back. Inhale, take the arms up. Exhale, hands to the heart. Now leading with the left leg. Inhale, arms up. Exhale, bow. Inhale, halfway. Exhale, bow. Inhale, left knee up. Exhale, bow. Inhale, arms up. Exhale, bow. Inhale, right knee up. Exhale, bow. Inhale, arms up. Exhale, hands to the heart. And just so we get the body really nice and warm, let's go ahead and do another round. So inhale, arms up. Exhale, bow. Inhale, halfway, arching the back, feeling that inhale. Exhale, bow. Inhale, right knee up and arch your back. Exhale, round. Inhale, arms up. Exhale, release down. Left leg comes up, inhaling. Exhaling, rounding. Inhaling, arms up. And exhale, hands to the heart. Second side, leading with the left. Inhale up. Exhale, bow. Halfway up, inhaling. Exhale, bow. Left leg up, inhaling. Exhale, bow. Inhaling up. Exhaling all the way over. Right knee up, inhaling. Exhale, bow. Inhale, arms up. Hands to the heart. And then hands onto the lap. Good. So hopefully you're feeling warm, and we can go ahead and start with the strength part of the pose, of the practice. So we're going to do sit stands. We did these last week, and we're going to do 10 of them. So they're very simple. Just kind of take your feet a little behind your knees. Inhale, come all the way up. Now, you don't have to use your arms, and then sit back down. You can use your hands on your legs if you like, and you don't have to take your arms overhead. This is 3. So as you go up, try to feel yourself pressing into your feet to help you to stand up. So that earth is pushing back up at you as you push down into it. This is 6, and down, and 7, and down, up, and down. You don't have to go at my speed, but and now we're up at 10. We're going to sit with our hips right hovering, just right at the chair seat. Pull your tailbone forward, pull your hips back, lengthen through your arms and hold. Now this is where you want to be sure you're breathing. And notice places where you may be clenching. It's hard to hang out in this. But the places that we sometimes do hang out is in our hips and our low back. So as you continue to breathe, don't worry if you feel your muscles shaking. You may get tired. You may need to come out before I do. And release. And then let's just take the feet apart and we'll circle our hips. So circling the hips helps to relieve tension that may have unwittingly and unknowingly crept into our low back. And reversing direction. And last circle. Okay, so let's stand up. We're going to practice a little bit of balance. So if you have any challenges with balance, just have your chair to one side. We'll start with the left leg. So we want to stand in mountain pose and get a good foundation with our hips over our heels, shoulders over our hips, arm bones back. And then lift your left leg up, flex your ankle, and just hold it there. Now, you're welcome to take your hand away from your support or use your support, or just have it kind of resting there without really using it so much. Go into your experience. Notice which muscles are working. Notice when you start to feel tired. Notice your breath. Push down into your standing foot. Feel those leg muscles engaging. Now take your leg out to the side. Same thing, keep the foot flexed. This time let's take the left arm up. And again, you may want to try doing it without the support to build more of your core strength. Yep. And sometimes we fall out. We just try to fall out gracefully. And so we'll take the chair to the other side and find our mountain pose and lift the right leg. Flex the ankle. Notice any differences. Does this leg feel like it's more connected or just easier somehow? Keep the tailbone down, keep the chest up. Try it without. We're usually better on one side than the other. Let's take the leg out to the side. Arm up. Tailbone down, chest up. Squeeze in with your outer hips. Don't tense your outer hips. I just mean to hug the muscles to the bone without adding any unnecessary tension. Learning to make that distinction between tensing or gripping and just simply hugging or just contracting intentionally. And then bring the leg back and release. Stand in mountain pose. You may be able to feel the blood as it moves around and circulates. Okay, so now we're going to take a forearm plank in the chair. So we're going to put our forearms down into the chair, elbows on the chair. Interlace your fingers in just a normal making a fist, but keep the heels of the hands away from one another. And then step your legs back and begin to hold. Now, this can be really challenging. We tend to think that we only use our shoulders here. So we're going to practice that. If you collapse, this would be collapsing. It's like gravity is one. So now I'm using gravity, the oppositional energy of gravity, where it's pushing up at me because I am resisting it. So I'm pushing down into my feet, engaging my muscles, hugging the bones. Navel is drawn up into the low back. So in other words, yoga poses involve your entire body, not just one section. Now just hold this, keep your shoulders down, and just keep breathing. Tighten your knees. Pull your knees up towards your hips. Keep breathing. Now, it's good to build up to about a 5-minute hold here. That can take some time, but it's very doable if you think about and make sure you're using your whole body, not just your arms. And then push your hips back and step in and come on back up. Now, as you stand in mountain pose and just reflect and feel, hopefully you can feel and be able to discern the difference in what it feels to be stretched out versus what it feels to be kind of hugged in, which is more of a strength thing. And stretched out is more of a expansive thing. We try to do both in yoga. In every practice, we try to do both. It's the solar phase, is that strengthening phase. The opening phase is more of the lunar phase. And by the way, hatha means sun and moon, so in Sanskrit. So here's another strengthening pose. Put your hands into your chair seat. Now lift your right leg up and bring it up as high as your hip. Don't roll your hip up. Keep your thigh parallel to the floor. And then activate your foot. Don't just let your leg hang. It's not on vacation, it's part of the pose. So reach through your heel, pull your toes back, but reach through the ball mounds of the foot. Lift your belly, and then if you're able, lift your left arm. And hold and breathe. Belly up. Join your fingers to one another. Join the thumb to the hand. And extend and reach. So this is where we're using flexibility by reaching with our strengthening practice of holding, lifting part of our body weight. And then release. Stand all the way back up. And then let's go over to the other side. Lift the left leg up, roll the thigh in, activate your foot, spread those toes, pull the toes back, but push out through the ball mounds. Roll both thighs in, lift your belly, lift your right arm. Now be mindful of your neck, tensing the neck. Don't try to hold yourself up by your head. Keep the neck long. Keep your left arm bone rolling out. Kneecaps drawn up towards the hips on both legs. And then release. And stand up. Nice. And then I believe we just have one more challenging pose. This pose is called Pravrajika. So we sit right up to the front edge of the chair, and actually I'm going to demonstrate this from the side. So I'm sitting right at the edge of my chair. My feet are a little forward of my knees. And a really important part of this pose is to learn to roll your arm bones out, lift your chest. And as you do that, not to push your low back forward. So pull your navel back and then start to slide out over your heels. Take the head back and up, shoulder blades down. Keep rolling those upper arm bones out and hold. Push down with your feet, thighs lift. Easy, smooth breathing. Lift from your tailbone, push up. And then release and come down. Nice. Okay, so now we'll just cool down with a couple of compensating poses so that hopefully we'll come back to what our homeostasis is. So let's do a twist again. Notice if your heart's beating a little harder, you're breathing a little deeper. And really the breathing deeper part is part of what we're trying to get to happen in our yoga practice, so that we just have more lung capacity with all the benefits that go along with that. Other side. And then come back, separate your feet just a little bit. Let's do those hip circles. And other direction. And then coming all the way back up. So you can either keep your legs apart or bring them together, slide back into your chair, whichever one you're doing, and just bow forward. You can put your hands on the floor, on your legs, whatever works for you, and just let your head hang. Feel that stretch in your back, all the way through the neck. It's really the purpose of this. It's to stretch the back and the hips. And then take your hands to your thighs, press down and bring yourself back up, sitting back into mountain pose, and just close your eyes. Just noticing your inner landscape. Tuning into the raw sensations created by your practice. Slowing the mind down. Let's bring the hands together at the heart. And bowing the head. Thank yourself for taking this time. May we have faith to know the divine enriches us, invigorates us, and is present with us throughout our day. Namaste. Okay, dear ones, thank you so much for being here, and I hope you'll join me again. Bye-bye.